I want to welcome you to this forum on rebuilding the U.S. innovation system. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and we're pleased to be a co-sponsor of this event. So I'm going to moderate this first panel. You know, the great thing about academically oriented conferences as opposed to Washington is they actually have long sessions where you can actually dig in and really explore the issue. So as opposed to my things where we have 7 minutes to talk and then you're done. So we're actually going to have, I think, a really interesting panel this morning. Before I introduce the panelists, I do want to thank the other co-sponsors of the event, the Economic Policy Institute, the Breakthrough Institute, the University of California, Washington Center, where we are today, and the Ford Foundation.
The starting point is that we've been doing this research with the support of the Ford Foundation for 3 years, and that the idea of this conference is to get some of these findings out into the open. And as Rob said, the core of the finding is that the U.S. government has been deeply involved in innovation policy, but it's a story that nobody knows. It's a story that hasn't been reported. That it's my pet peeve that when you read in the business pages of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal an article about a key technological breakthrough, a new type of computer chip or a new medication or whatever, the journalistic convention is that down towards the last paragraph or the second to the last paragraph, there'll be a little line saying some of this research was funded by the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency or the NIH or whatever, but that there's never any kind of systematic look at what does the portfolio of this government agency look like. Is this particular innovation that they funded just a random outcome, or have they been funding a lot? And that's what we've been trying to explore, that many of these working papers are looking at, trying to look at the portfolios of these different agencies to find out what they've actually been up to. And in that context, we find that there are literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of success stories of firms, many of which started small, that have been nurtured by one or another government program and have gradually grown and are now making significant productive contributions to the economy, producing new products, putting people to work, et cetera. Okay, so that's the kind of general overall story that we're trying to tell, but we're also addressing these issues in the midst of this severe economic downturn, and it wouldn't be right to just talk about innovation in an economy where jobs are disappearing, where there's tremendous concern about where the bottom to the current downturn might be. So we've framed today's conversation to really address the question of how do we think in the current moment about combining economic stimulus or an economic recovery package, whatever is the word of the day, with policies that would take this federal innovation system, this range of programs that we've been talking about, and strengthen them and strengthen that capacity for the long term. The word that I made up for the day is Stim-Novation. I mean, that what we have to do as a country is figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need economic policies that stimulate the economy, that pull us out of the recession, but that simultaneously are oriented towards innovation and strengthening this capacity for innovation over the long term. And it's through that combination that the policies become sustainable. The concerns about blowing out the deficit, spending more in the short term, is not going to be an issue over the long term if that spending in the short term is strengthening the capacity over the long term. So we talk in the policy proposal that that's available to you in the press packet about a number of concrete ideas, and there'll be more discussion of that this afternoon, particularly oriented towards alternative energy and green jobs, of how to actually think concretely about what Stim-Novation would look like. So one of the things that we found in the course of our research, which we found somewhat astonishing, particularly given the kind of prevailing view about that the private sector is always better than the public sector, is that the federal laboratories, particularly the Department of Energy laboratories, have a growing program which is called Work for Others, where they do research technology development work directly with private firms, both big and small, and those private firms are paying the federal laboratories to solve their technological problems, to help them. And so if you think of the prevailing ideas of the last 20 years that provided goods and services are always better than publicly provided, how do you explain the fact that many of these corporations, when they have a really tough technological problem, take their hard-earned money and give it to scientists and technicians at the federal laboratories, people who are basically on the public sector payroll, to solve their problems? The other program that we wanted to highlight in this context is the Small Business Innovation Research Program that has received almost no recognition in the press. I've Googled in the New York Times archive for Small Business Innovation Research, which is a program which has been going since 1983, and there are a total of 9 sites in the whole New York Times index for this program. The program now gives something on the order of $2 billion a year. I stole this slide from somebody else's slideshow. One of my discoveries doing this research is that you can put together a PowerPoint that's entirely taken from other people's PowerPoints. It's a kind of new art form that I've been thinking about pursuing. But the SBIR program, everybody needs to know about it because it's the first line that a scientists, engineers, technologists working in the private sector, working in the university, working in federal labs, they decide they have a commercially viable idea. The first place they turn is to this program, which is administered through 11 different government agencies, and it provides these phase 1 and these phase 2 grants that have nurtured literally thousands and thousands of firms over the 25 years that this program has been in effect. But this program is so little known that the congressional reauthorization that's supposed to have taken place this year got into trouble because the House and Senate had different and conflicting versions. That this is one of the unrecognized roles that the federal government has played, and it's been elaborated by my colleagues. They're the authors of one of the working papers that's back there. And what Josh Whitford and Andrew Schrank argue is that our prevailing way of talking about what the federal role or the government role should be with technology talks only about market failure. But there's this other distinct thing called network failure, when innovation relies on collaboration across organizational lines. It involves building networks of collaboration, but that building networks of collaboration often fails. And in part it fails because people can't find the network partners that they need. They find the partners they need, but then they find that they can't trust them or that their competence is questionable. And so one of the key roles that these federal government initiatives have played has been in working to overcome these network failures, to essentially help connect these parties to the other people that they need and help solve the problems of trust and competence. So let me very briefly talk about the negative side of the story. There's too little coordination across programs. That the great strength of these federal initiatives is that they're widely decentralized, that the people who are giving resources and support to private sector actors are widely dispersed across the federal system, but they've carried that, I think, too far in that there is even no centralized database of the full range of federal initiatives, say, to develop new versions of lithium-ion batteries that would last longer and generate more power. That under the current system, there could be dozens of different agencies that were engaging in that. The second problem, and then the distorted priorities, is the continuing excessive focus on defense, and particularly on the blue sky Star Wars type of projects that are absorbing too much of the federal R&D dollars. Uncertain funding, zero-sum battles, this is completely familiar, that the real value of federal R&D spending has been declining since 2003. There's this increasingly dysfunctional fight between biological scientists and interests versus physical, chemical. The third is the key one, which I want to emphasize, which is that our system is weak when it gets to deployment and implementation. And two of the instances of this are completely familiar to us: the broadband internet, but the same thing is true with solar photovoltaics. In both cases, the U.S. was in the leadership role. Our laboratories produced key breakthroughs, but that other countries, by using public-private partnerships rather than simply relying on the market, have been much more effective at deploying and implementing these technologies, so that the U.S. is now 15th or 16th in the world in access to broadband internet. We're, I think, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th in photovoltaic solar cell. So, and then the last is, of course, the lack of public awareness, which exacerbates all of the others, because it's harder to generate the stable funding. It's harder for the government to develop the capacity for implementation when, in fact, people don't even know that the federal government is deeply involved in technology policy. So we make, in the policy proposal that's in the packet, a number of proposals, one of which is for a cabinet-level Department of Innovation, that the chief technology officer that Obama promised to appoint should be in charge of a cabinet-level Department of Innovation, which would not run innovation projects itself, but would focus on coordination, spreading best practices, and working at the deployment end, developing the capacity within that agency to figure out how to use government procurement, regulatory policy, investment policy, other policies to pull some of these critical technologies through the whole economy and accelerate the speed of deployment.
So last 6 or 12 months, I found myself thinking more and more about some really big problems, particularly our overall energy delivery and our creation and delivery system. Thinking about how, as a whole society, we manufacture sustainable goods and then consume them and recycle them. These are a lot of what I do in my chief sustainability role at Sun. And there's obviously other big problems like disease and homeland security. And when you spend much time thinking about these problems, you end up being forced to think about national scale innovation. How do we get thousands, or in some cases millions of people to work together on a problem in some coherent way. And as I've spent more and more time thinking about this, kind of coming from a computer science angle, where my background is, you end up thinking about platforms. How do we design kind of a core infrastructure which becomes a target for lots of people to work on something, and that a coherent whole comes out of that, and we don't end up with just a million separate projects. And I could spend some time trying to describe it better, but it's probably easiest to give you a couple examples. Probably the biggest one is the internet. At its core, the internet's just a few specification papers that were done by a small group of people. There was a big kind of initial investment in core infrastructure of the initial bandwidth that hooked the initial set of things together. And from that set of specification and the rules about how you hooked into the bigger network as it grew, let the thing explode into something I don't think any of us could have possibly understood when it started. The amount of innovation that's happened on that network and the amount of economic growth and economic stimulus that's come from the internet is just startling, and continues today. I mean, who would have guessed, what YouTube would have been 2 years ago? So it's truly an amazing thing. I think typifies for me, what this platform idea is. There's a couple other interesting examples. One is the Human Genome Project, which again, core central around how we're going to gather data about human genomes, let different labs collaborate and put data in a database. And over time, kind of the rules about how people participated reached a critical mass. And I just spent some time Googling around last night, and just the number of research projects, the number of projects in the commercial space that reference back and say, oh, we're using data out of GenBank, the big genome database, that are talking about putting data back in, and so they're getting this network effect of everybody who's participating is also contributing back, and it's just getting better and better. And again, there's this core at the middle that has enabled this huge blossoming of innovation. Just one final example, which is a newer one. It's a project I'm actually on the board of directors of, a National Science Foundation project called NEON, which is the National Ecological Observatory Network. And NEON's goal is to build a continental scale environmental observing platform, and to seed it with the first kind of big environmental sensing towers so that we can really understand CO2, number of cloudy days in a particular area, what's happening with water, what's happening with air quality. But as much as putting up the first towers with the sensors, it's talking about how do we collect data from any project and share it in a meaningful way, so I can take data from this university's project or data from this university's project, put it together, and end up with a meaningful result. Again, I was in just a startlingly exciting discussion a couple weeks ago about all of the commercial people that are now coming in saying, oh, if you had this and this, I could go as an insurance company do this and this and this. And so we're starting to hear, or farmers and the whole agribusiness side. So we're starting to see that view of a platform of now kind of rising up, and people saying, okay, it's now both a research platform, but the commercial opportunities and excitement are starting to spur around it as well. So that's a few examples. Hopefully you get an idea what kind of the kernel of this idea of a platform is. Let me talk a little about what's in common with these four examples, because I think it's instructive to see kind of what makes a success. The first thing is that it's the ability for others to come and build on it. So I can start a project, say one of us wanted to go start a new website that was about U.S. innovation systems and gather up all the presentations from here and put some commentary. Any of us could go home tonight and just do that. Any of us that were so inclined could go home tonight, start surfing through GenBank. In my case, I'd be looking for how many times the letter A appeared in a DNA sequence. I wouldn't know much more what to do, but the truth is we would all be capable. There's a defined way of how any of us could go and participate in that. And what that does is it means both people who were designed to be part of it, but also others who may just had a good idea, it lets them participate in this bigger thing. And I think when you say, oh, national scale innovation, people say, oh, we need the next Manhattan Project or the moonshot. And I think this idea of how other people plug in differentiates these recent successes from those other projects. There was obviously no way to participate in the Manhattan Project unless you were invited or forcefully invited to come and participate. The second commonality is, in general, there's totally free intellectual property, and it's defined what the intellectual property rules are. This is critical. If you want to use the internet, you don't have to go get a license from any particular company. The core patents around it are held in a way that you're guaranteed not to be sued. The people who hold the patents have signed them over in a way and made guarantees about that. And so it becomes a way for you to participate and have an understanding that your participating is not leading you into a long-term check that you're going to have to write every month to participate, or that you're boxing yourself into an intellectual property corner. And this is when we think about things like building out the smart grid, is places where I start to worry and say, okay, are we putting in place the rules so that I don't have to go write a check to so-and-so every time I want to hook a solar cell up because they owned a patent for this part of the smart grid and how you connect into it. The third thing I think is and Fred talked a lot, mix of public and private. Almost all of these big things started with public funding. The core piece, the core initial customer was the government. The core piece was funded by the government. But very early on, there became kind of understood how commercial folks have participated. And this has been true of the Human Genome Project with biological research and with the other examples. And obviously, the Internet's the great case. And then finally, and something that's not discussed much, is that there was a sense of national consistency and in most cases, international consistency about how you participated. Those of us who don't live here can hop on a plane, fly home, and how we use the internet there is going to be the same as how we use it here. Though if you want to participate in the Human Genome Project, the Human Genome Project doesn't care where you live. There isn't a piece of it that is tied to that. You say, well, why are you bringing this up? And the problem is that a lot of the big problems we want to go tackle today, that's not true. The laws and rules about how you participate in, to use one of Professor Block's cases in broadband, are actually down even at a local town-by-town level and buried in contracts between cities and broadband providers. You know, our energy policy today is really happening in small conference rooms in a state-by-state level as the local electricity management board in each state meet with the very large energy providers and work out how they're going to operate for the next year. That's not going to provide us a way to get to national scale solutions. Intellectual property, I mentioned again, smart grid, as we start to evolve these things, what are going to be the rules around intellectual property, who owns what? The ability for people to connect. It's not possible if you wanted to put solar on your roof. There are still states in this country where you aren't by law supported to go connect up to the grid and sell back. And so we don't have a platform for which people can go add themselves in. So, you know, just in summary, I think thinking about national scale innovation is important right now. Thinking more importantly, and I think to Fred's point about network failures and so forth, the idea of platforms that set the rules about how multiple people come and work, so we're just not trying to set up message boards and help people find each other, but also provide some structure on how people work together, and then going and looking at some of our big problems and figuring out what is the platform that will enable us to move forward there. And so, you know, thinking of the new incoming crowd here, I think it's important that we look particularly at our energy infrastructure and start to look at what the platform that will spur the innovation that we need is there. So, thank you.
Let me tell you just a quick note about my background and why what we're doing is actually quite relevant to this particular work. Our venture firm specifically looks at breakthrough science coming out of universities and government programs. And I used to be the president of Varda Institute, which now runs the commercialization assistance programs for NIH, USDA, particularly on the SBIR side, and used to run work for the Advanced Technology Program. I saw Mark Stanley here today, as well as DARPA and the National Science Foundation. So I actually spent time on the nonprofit side directly working with federal agencies trying to push stuff out And now I'm on the private venture capital side where we're looking at pulling stuff into the market. So we work very much at that interstitial point between venture capital and the private markets. So I've titled my talk, Jumpstarting Innovation, or Why You Shouldn't Listen to Venture Capitalists. So this is going to be a very selfless discussion, somewhat, about why venture capitalists may not necessarily be all that insightful into what's wrong with the venture and the innovation ecosystem, and what, if you take a step back and look broadly at what's going on in the market, you can try to see some things that perhaps could be fixed or improved. The macro system is this. There's a huge inefficiency in the system. We've gone on about this already, but it bears worth repeating, which is that there's breakthrough technology highly dispersed throughout the world. It's not just limited to institutions like MIT and Stanford, even though those are the places that get a lot of the attention, right? There's great technology everywhere. Those of you who come from the middle of the country or from the southeast, you know there are great universities and great scientific breakthroughs happening everywhere. However, the venture ecosystem to grow killer companies, that is, companies that can really change the world and create lots of jobs, those are concentrated in a handful of places, primarily in California, and then to a lesser extent now in Boston, and then in a few little other pockets around the country. But in terms of scale, they're far smaller. You get little pockets like San Diego and Austin and the Research Triangle, but they're nothing on the scale compared to what California and Boston are generating. So why is this, right? This is a very interesting phenomenon. So this is an example of a company that we've been working with. This is Viatris. This is a spin-out from the University of Kansas, and it's a company I had the pleasure of serving as their CSO. Technology came out of the heartland of America. We put together a team that involved marketing services out of Los Angeles. So we had management out of Atlanta. We had legal help out of Chicago. We had clients sprinkled throughout the world. And the company that acquired us and was the partner in developing and commercializing the technology was in San Diego. So this is real. This is happening in real time. This is the way the businesses work now. And this company, by the way, had all of about 4 people, right? So this is a new type of way that innovation is being done because these networks of collaboration now are spreading geographically. And so one can argue, well, this is just a one-shot example. I mean, does this happen that often? And the answer is yes. Here's another company. This is Stony Brook Purification. This is a water filtration company. Technology is out of Stony Brook University out on Long Island, not necessarily what is considered an innovation ecosystem. And you have advisors out of Austin, Texas, San Diego, marketing help out of Southern California. We have capital out of Northern California, England, and China. We have strategic partners. We have a lawyer out of Boston and D.C. We had partners out of North Dakota and Ohio. This is the way that innovation is happening today. And this company is in real time, and we're working on this every day. In fact, just last week I was working with several of the folks out 2 weeks ago before the holidays. We were in San Diego working with a partner with a team coming out of Minneapolis and North Dakota. So this is the new way of innovation, and this is very different to the way it used to be done and has been done in Silicon Valley for a long time. So let's contrast the old and the new. So the innovation playing field 2.0. So what I'd like to argue is that the innovation playing field has essentially changed over just in the past few years. The internet itself has enabled a way of collaborating and building companies that wasn't in existence before. So the old way is local, the new way is global. So if you're a startup company and you start a company, you are now a multinational competing on a global playing field from the day you incorporate, even before you incorporate. So businesses have to think like this now, and they do. One challenge, incidentally, is that most people at the state level who work at spurring innovation are because of geographical boundaries and the need to kind of think about their constituency base, et cetera, they tend to look locally. So when they look at building companies, they don't like to see companies work in this model because all they think about is lost jobs as opposed to jobs that they might not otherwise have had in the first place, right? So this is a real challenge for state-level initiatives. So the old way is old relationships. The new method is flexible, trust-based relationships. When you hear a lot of VCs talk about what the government needs to do, particularly those that have a lot of press these days and seem to be catching a lot of the attention of the talk about what innovation policy should look like, they're mostly talking about subsidies to support the existing market leaders, not opening the floodgates for the masses. So, I'm not going to name names because we work with some of them, and there's a lot of them that we'll probably work with. But you hear a lot of the press from people who are venture capitalists, and if you really look at what they're saying, they're basically saying, support me in my work and reduce my risk, right? as opposed to saying, well, how can we fund those thousands of other companies that are trying to start to get a shot at this? Or how can we level the playing field so they get an equal shot at this? So think about that. I will also say that the venture capital LP ecosystem, so the LPs, this is MBA speak or venture speak. The LPs are the primary investors in venture capital firms. So the relationship between VCs and LPs, that ecosystem is surprisingly risk averse, and it's shrinking because of the financial crisis and other things. So VCs are primarily funded by LPs, and LPs are those coming out of major financial institutions, particularly pensions and endowments. That world is become a quite risk averse world, surprisingly. And so if you want to fix the problem with innovation, you want to follow the money up to the source. You want to follow the Mississippi all the way up to Minnesota, right? You want to look for where that money is trickling down from, and you find it's actually coming from a shrinking pool of money. So that's why the private markets in the venture world may not be as smooth and efficient as people thought.
I'm going to be saying the same thing everyone else said, only I'm going to say it differently. Because I sit in a different chair in observing the innovation in the economy, and particularly innovation that's centered at the university. When I'm not a dean, I'm an economic sociologist like Fred, and I look at the world at a high level of abstraction. But as a dean, there is relatively little abstraction. It's all about people and what they want and what they need at that moment, and why they land in your office. So I'm going to talk from my perspective, as this is my 6th year as dean of a small business school at UC Davis. If you don't know where Davis is, we're near Sacramento. We're about an hour from the Silicon Valley. We're in Northern California. UC Davis is a large public university. We have 30,000 students. We bring in about $580 million a year in external research funding, and we knew where the puck was going, because our portfolio of research centers on alternative energy, on agriculture, including such things as biomass, which is part of agriculture these days, and healthcare. We have a major medical center, and so we're doing R&D in areas that a lot of people are interested in. I'm also going to use, like everybody else who talks about innovation, I'm going to use some metaphors, and I'm going to mix them up terribly. You can't talk about innovation without talking about light bulbs or lightning striking or chains, value chains, supply chains, or apparently pucks. So, or roads and paths. I'm going to talk about roads today, and I think these metaphors help us give us another way to think about innovation and how it is organized, which is really what I think is the important thing. Let's see. All right, Victor talked about rational actors. There they are. Those are rational actors in our market, and as you know, last February, the February 2008 economic stimulus bill spent upward of $160 billion trying to stimulate these actors to go out and make the economy not fall into a recession, or at least to soften the fall in some ways. But it's really the idea that you throw capital out there, and self-interested actors, and whether they're firms or individuals, will go out and do good things, and they will produce more economic activity. 160 billion doesn't sound like very much today, but there was some thought that was really going to make a difference, and in fact, of course, it has not made nearly the difference that people had hoped. We're now talking about economic stimulation as an investment, and maybe Stim-Novation is where we're going to be talking about it from now on. But it's the idea that not just throwing capital, but throwing it strategically at building infrastructure, roads and bridges. They will produce jobs, which we didn't get with just throwing capital at the economy, but really targeted at projects that will produce positions for people who then go to Walmart or Kmart and spend their money. It's also, and in fact, I'm from California, and we need new roads. There's no question about it. We need some new bridges. We're earthquake country. We need some retrofits. But in fact, that's an image of stimulating the economy that really comes out of an industrial era of goods movement. That you not only do you get jobs, people are saying that you're going to get roads for the movement of goods. It's like building the Transcontinental Railroad. It's going to open markets. Well, in fact, as we've been talking about it today, that that's not the way the economy is organized now. It says nothing about services. It says nothing about knowledge as part of the critical infrastructure of a society. Clearly, we've all been thinking the same things, but we increasingly, I suspect those people those of us here in this room understand that actors are not independent. That whether they're connected through capital networks, through knowledge networks, through communities of practice in industrial sectors or scientific communities, and that how you stimulate the market if you're going to be strategic about it, you've got to figure out those places where actors are going to make a difference, not just in what they do, but how they connect different parts of the economy. And if we were to stimulate that little central node there, or make it possible for that node to bridge the rational actors on the left with the ones on the right, we might actually get more traction. That in a sense, that could be a bridge, not necessarily a physical bridge, but a metaphorical or a social bridge to different worlds. Say on the left, we have scientists, R&D, with those on the right, which might be producers, consumers, other parts of the economy. It would make far more sense to help to build those bridges, the social and intellectual bridges, perhaps, that might connect those parts of the economy, which apparently is what we've all been thinking. Now, I'm the dean of a business school, and my job is not to teach commercialization to scientists. It's to teach MBA students. Well, a lot of our MBA students actually have science degrees and come back to get an MBA, or they may have advanced degrees or undergraduate degrees, but they're very interested in the business of science. And so we thought, rather than giving them Harvard Business School cases on how to commercialize a technology, we would actually partner them with scientists and go into the labs. And Davis has an extraordinarily collaborative culture. It's a very open space. People come and go all the time. They know each other across the scientists know each other across many of the labs. It has to do with some of the ways in which we are organized as a university. We have graduate groups so that the microbiologists from the med school, the vet school, from ecology, they're all together in a graduate group. And so we have a governance structure that really permits collaborative relationships. So anyway, we started teaching young scientists, including them in MBA classes, but also teaching some very special classes that put them together with the MBAs on the commercialization process, on laboratories. How do you think about your technology? How would a customer look at it? Is it a platform for other things? How could it link up? We started to teach this. We started out with nine PhD and postdoc scientists, and we decided to look at them because the more senior ones are already pretty much locked into the way they think about their science. They don't think about they think about publishing in Cell or Nature as sort of that's the highest measure of success, and it stops there. Where we want to say, no, that's the beginning. You get it out into the world and make a difference. But that's not where established scientists want to go. So we're taking those who are a little bit younger, and I think of it as the 4-H model. 4-H was a program where you take the kids and you teach them the latest agricultural processes or programs for shearing sheep or killing weeds or whatever, and they would go home and tell their farmer parents. You could never tell the parents but you could tell the kids, and then some of that would seep through. Well, that was our stealth strategy for change in the labs, to actually think about commercializing. It's been extraordinarily successful, and in fact, we hold a reception for the graduates of this business development program, and we invite the heads of the labs, because they have to get, the postdocs and graduate students have to get permission, because they're like serfs in the lab, and if they learn anything else from the business school, they've got to have permission. Well, they actually started coming and talking to each other. There's a National Academy of Science people saying, "Oh, you're letting your postdocs in," and they're saying, "Oh yeah, I am, yeah," and it's become a thing to do now, that they're open and they consider this. So we started doing these programs for scientists. It's been extraordinarily successful, but a lot of them can't or won't take out a year. So we started doing what we call business development intensive academies. They're really an academy, and we'll take a group of scientists, typically 30, 40, actually 20 to 50, but typically 35 or so, and for a whole week we will give them an intensive understanding of the market. On Monday morning, they know their own technology and nothing else. And on Friday afternoon, they're doing elevator pitches to venture capitalists. It's an incredible transformation. We give them the language. We give them a network. Here's some of the things that we teach them. They're smart people, and this is not rocket science, but it is a critical language, and it's a critical way of thinking. Science gets you to dig down deep into a very specific, what is your particular contribution at a very small level, whereas business basically turns it on its head. How can you take what you know and claim space for it in a process? How does it connect to other processes? We get them to think about it totally differently. We make them call potential customers. We teach them how to write a business plan. We teach them what intellectual property is. We bring in successful entrepreneurs. It's taught in part by venture capitalists. This one was on green technology. As I said, Davis is quite strong in this area, but we brought in young scientists from around the country. So they started to develop a network around their own ideas. And because that is part of what needs to take place. It's not just in their labs, but how do they get the network? They had Susan McCormick, who's the head of the Morris and Foster clean tech practice in the Bay Area legal firm. She walked them through what it is, and of course she walks out with a bunch of companies that want to start, and with MoFo as their legal counsel. So what I want to just emphasize is that there are these spaces. It is not expensive to fill these spaces, but they are critical. Right now, it is dependent on basically 3 people, a few venture capitalists who are happy to support us, and the Kaufman Foundation. I will say that they get what we're doing. They really like it, and they want us to figure out how to franchise it. This would be something terrific for infrastructure, for not just building roads, but building a public-private space as part of the educational commercialization infrastructure.
I mean, the idea of how do you really finance thousands of these tiny little firms, many of which are going to fail, in some sense, I think it was implicit in what Victor said. I mean, that even if you create a lot more kind of low-cost venture capital, it's still not going to do the trick, because venture capital is so intensely labor-intensive. I mean, Victor told me he can carry 5 or 6 deals, and so you're talking about jobs, you know. So one of the ideas that I'm trying to float is that you could, in fact, create a new kind of stock market to do what the stock market was historically supposed to do. And you would have to have it highly regulated. You'd have to have firms have much higher disclosure and all the kinds of regulatory things, but even much more than what we failed to do in the financial markets. But that basically these firms struggling through the valley of death would come in and they would say sell 1 million shares for $1 a piece. They would have been vetted by some kind of registered investment bank to make sure that they really had a project or whatever, but that and that you'd eliminate any kind of market for corporate control. They could only sell, say, shares that were equivalent to 20% of their total worth or whatever. But the idea is then you would create long-term mutual funds that would buy 1,000 shares of this one and 1,000 shares of that one, and essentially create a mutual fund portfolio that these LPs, the pension funds and the insurance companies and so forth, could buy those long-term mutual funds, and their likelihood of their probability of the value going up would be the same for venture capital. I mean, that half the firms would go under, but half of them would flourish and so forth. That would be the kind of last piece of institutional design that would make this decentralized system really grow. It would be the kind of platform that Dave was talking about on the financial end. And the idea is that after these firms get to be a certain size, they could graduate, and go into a real stock market, where people play fast and loose.
But here's a larger question, which I'd like Rob to start with. Every 10 years, Washington starts talking about competitiveness and innovation, and then it's lost. As you all are aware, the Competes Act was a significant step forward as a result of the gathering storm documentation, yet the Congress and the administration failed to fund it at all, period. And I'm somewhat concerned about the initiatives that may pursue, and that's why I'm here today to listen to your discussion. So one of the questions I have for you is, do you believe the legislators understand what you're talking about this morning? Do they understand return on investment? Do they understand about risk aversity? Do they understand what VCs are doing or not doing? So my question is, how do we educate those who are responsible for creating this innovation system? Because I'm not disagreeing with what you're talking about. Do they understand what's involved in bringing new theories to the marketplace?
Mark, just a quick answer. I would suggest the problem is not them. It's the economic priesthood that essentially determines what's economic policy and what's not. And they largely have said this is not economic policy, this is science policy or technology policy, and they've divorced the two. And until you bring back innovation into the center of economic theory and economic thinking in Washington, we're not going to be able to make this case, because Competes is seen as that's something that helps the science community. Now the question is the Obama team, it's Jason Furman and Larry Summers and all of those folks, do they understand the centrality of innovation to economic growth? I'm not sure. And we'll see within the next 6 months whether they do. But I think if that group of people get this, it's all sliding downhill after uphill or downhill. Downhill in the good sense of it's easy to get things done after that. But if they're saying, no, what's important, as Fred alluded to, is just pour some more capital in the trough, I don't think we're going to get there.
Yeah. My name is Sam Lakin from the Council on Competitiveness, speaking of the Competes Act. Our overarching topic was Stim-Novation. But it occurs to me, having sat through these fascinating presentations, that we may be asking more than is realistic to expect. I used to run a venture capital company in the mid-'80s in Massachusetts. There were 17 nonprofits owned by the state that financed different kinds of activities. We all claimed we were creating an enormous number of jobs. There was very little evidence to back up those claims. And I've yet to hear anything from the panel that says, here is a stimulus that creates jobs, particularly in the short run, certainly encouraging small business over the long haul will do that. And in fact, the chancellor of the University of Maryland told me that there were something like 50,000 R&D research jobs in the state of Maryland. So creating those jobs is a good thing, but I'm not so sure that's what we really mean by stimulus. So maybe we have to face the fact that these are strategic long-range investments, and to be asked to also make them short-term job creation vehicles is really just seeking a miracle that really just can't happen. I wonder what the panelists think.
If I can just respond to that real quickly, Tim, I agree that there's certainly much of what we've been talking about is certainly medium term and long term and has to be focused on, but there are a whole set of initiatives or policies that one could envision. In fact, we proposed some in a recent report 2 weeks ago called Timely, Targeted, Temporary, and Transformative, an innovation economic stimulus plan that had a whole bunch of things. For example, $2 billion a year invested next year with in university research infrastructure. According to NSF, there's about an $8 billion research infrastructure backlog or shortfall in the U.S. today. Our universities are using antiquated equipment. You could get that $2 billion on the street with orders placed by June of next year. That would stimulate the whole equipment market. It would create jobs there, and at the same time, you'd have another benefit of having more research infrastructure. That's why Nature magazine just endorsed it last week. But there are a whole lot of things you can do that are, and I think we need to really be creative and not just say we're just going to write checks to people. We need to think about where you can put those two things together.
I think another angle to this that people often overlook is the role of the government as a customer. And if you look, I took part in the supercomputing industry for a long time, and yeah, you say, okay, DARPA was funding critical things there, our intelligence agencies were funding critical research, but the truth of the matter is what the government's biggest role was they were a constant customer year after year and caused people to invest in companies like I was involved in and take part. And I think, I look at my industry, the government's the largest purchaser of computing equipment in the world, but hands down, they can fundamentally change how we look at things. I look at our energy policy and other things. I think the role of the government is saying we're going to go in this direction to pull markets with it and pull money with it is fundamentally often overlooked and powerful.
Yeah, let me say something as well. I mean, obviously the timing is everything in terms of this, and that there aren't a lot of really sound innovation policies that you can roll out the door immediately, but you can, for example, all of the granting agencies, NSF, NIH, and the SBIR programs have tons of proposals that are in the pipeline that are going to fall below wherever their budget line is. And so one way you can get money out the door very fast is essentially giving those agencies more money to pump things out the door quickly. But I think the other key comes around the green technologies, those that are mature like solar photovoltaics, the electric cars. I mean, the government can essentially become purchaser of last resort. I mean, essentially say, we want you to expand your capacity by a factor of 10, over the next 2 years, and we will buy, anything that you don't sell on the market. That if we sit around and think about it, there are a lot of things that can be done of that order that meet both that fit the Stim-Novation category.
Eagles?
I want to just add very quickly to what Fred had. This is, you very quickly educate a lot of scientists and engineers on what we're doing in a pretty small way. And I thought about this. I had one of the people who visited me were top executives at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and they said, we hear what you're doing up here at Davis, and we have a lot of programs with that lab at UC Davis, and they said, I need help. He says, we got to start making money on all of this technology. He says, I got 6,000 scientists, and 4 of them are entrepreneurial. And I said, well, we probably could help you, but what we do in a very small way. It would be very easy to do to stimulate some innovation by seeding some of these large places. Which just, how do you think about your technology in terms of the market? Not very many of them necessarily will do it, but you don't need a lot of them to do it. I'd love to take a bunch of them as MBAs and see what I could do.
I think it's very important when we think about financing this new wave of technical innovation that we are going to also necessarily rebuild the system of financial regulations, that we be very cognizant of the nature of simplifying risk, of reducing risk in priority areas. Somebody mentioned tax credits is successful in Maryland. I think that's an important feature of simplifying risk. Loan guarantees, we have vast systems of loan guarantees that are being extended maybe as we speak, but have those, the systems of loan guarantees simplified, clarified, focused on the priority areas that we're talking about.